Shalom Israel, Shalom family. Um, Today we want to take another look at the biblical Sabbath, and I think for most, in particular, how the calendar of creation functions. I think most persons may have a difficulty with accepting and embracing the idea, one, because it's new, two, we are in captivity, and because we are in captivity, we are following the ways of our captors, so we have grown so familiar with it. Everything around us relates to the Pope's calendar, or commonly known as the Gregorian calendar. Everything is centered around that calendar. Work days, quote unquote holidays, and none of these principles can be found anywhere in the scriptures. So what I want to share today is trying to make as far as I understand, the calendar of creation understandable in a practical manner. So what I would have done, I would have drawn a horizon, and I would have shown where the sun rises, where the sun sets. So we know from at least from an observational point of view, how the sun will traverse the sky, and also how the moon will traverse the sky. It follows this pattern based on how we see it. So we know this would be the peak, or what we will call the meridian point, or the midpoint. So we know that would be, let's call it noon. So that will be referred to as noon or midday, right? So as this calendar goes, we would recognize that this is how it functions. So when we hear the terms, the phases of the moon, so the primary phases will be new moon, first quarter, full moon, and last quarter. Of course, these different time periods, they occur at intervals, so it's not something that happens all the time. But for those who might be a bit more detailed with the understanding, the intervals between these periods in terms of their midpoints they usually refer to it in terms of the scientific community as the waxing crescent, waxing gibbous, waning gibbous, and waning crescent, which would give you kind of like an overall view how the calendar of creation works in terms of the moon in tandem with the sun. So what I would start with is when the month begins. This will be referred to as conjunction, where the sun and moon would essentially rise partly around the same time. So sunrise, and I would call it the moonrise. So both of them would take place on the same day. Now, to make the conjunction concept understandable, the only time we can have a solar eclipse is when this phenomena takes place, or conjunction takes place. So every time there is what we call a solar eclipse, this is what actually happens with the solar eclipse. So if the sun and the moon are positioned at the same time, every time the new moon comes around, we will have a solar eclipse every time. But based on how each of the luminaries function in tandem but also independent of each other, we have this phenomena that may take place maybe at least twice every year or so. And usually too, what they suggest concerning it is once we have this phenomena taking place, we would also have the eclipses coming in pairs. So if you have a solar eclipse, you would have a lunar eclipse, right? Or you would have three of them. So it would be either two solar eclipses, one lunar eclipse, or two lunar eclipses and one solar eclipse. So that is how the principle functions. These are things that we can look up in terms of what the scientific community says. Coming back to the topic now, I would have given on the whiteboard here an approximation 7.3. Now, what does this actually mean? The 7.3 here means is the period between the phases. So from new moon to first quarter, we have a period of 7.3 days. And the same thing from first quarter to full moon. Now let's look at first quarter now. Now remember I said that we have the moonrise here, noon at the west. First quarter takes place in this way. Now, and this is why they call it the first quarter. When the sun is about setting, sunset, in the western part of the hemisphere, we have the moon at its peak, and this is usually the shape of the moon. And it is positioned mid-sky overhead. So if we do a mathematical observation, we would realize that this gives us a 90-degree angle, right? And with this 90-degree angle, what happens here is the moon is overhead and the sun is about setting, and that's why it's referred to as first quarter. So this is where it gives us the announcement that the Sabbath is about to begin, because it takes, as I said, approximately 7.3 days from the new moon to first quarter, right? So to first quarter, that is what happens with the new moon. So we have the illuminated side of the moon. It actually faces the sun at sunset. So when the sun is just about setting, if we just gaze straight up to the midpoint of the sky, we will have first quarter. Now, full moon now, as we look at full moon, what is actually the full moon? Now, these are now concepts that we have to familiarize ourselves with. So, full moon now, we look at the time the moon rises. Now, remember, this is the shape. Full moon is as it says, the moon is full. So let me just clear this area here, and we have full moon, and it rises just about the same time that the sun sets. So we have a 180-degree angle now. So as we see mathematically, 180 degrees apart, the sun and the moon. Hence the reason it's fully illuminated, because when the sun is just about setting, the moon is just about rising. And these things are instants. It's not like it lasts for 10 hours a day or so, 24 hours, whatever the case may be. It doesn't last that long. So whenever the sun rises, the sun sets, and the moon rises, this is where we have the phenomena of the 180 degrees. So this now gives us another 7.3 day average to bring us to the full moon, which is 180 degrees apart. Now, that's the first half of the biblical month. Now, let's consider now the second half of the biblical month. So this brings us to 15 days. And then now, after this 15-day period, the moon starts to what we call wane. And it loses its size, it loses its shape. So we're going from full moon now. What will be the next phase? Last quarter. So as we look at it now, we have at sunrise here. Let me just move the east here. So we know sunrise here. This now will indicate to us we have, and remember as I said, the side that's illuminated is the side that faces the sun. So we have like a D shape now that faces the sun. So this half of the moon is no longer illuminated. And this is what we now refer to as last quarter, because it's in the quadrant now. So first quarter, then you have full moon, that's second quarter, or 2/4, which is half, entire half. Then we have the third quarter, which is basically completion of a circle. And then now, which is the last quadrant now, for the sun and the moon to come back together. And this, again, takes another 7.3 days on average to get from the full moon to the last quarter. And as we get to the last quarter, this basically brings us back to the sun and the moon rising together again. And this is what, as I said before, would reflect if there would be a conjunction, and in terms of the conjunction, if there would be a solar eclipse. So this phenomena can only happen at the conjunction, and the same thing with the lunar eclipse. It can only occur on a full moon. That's the only period that these eclipses can occur. They can occur on no other phase. So taking these things into consideration, what I want to look at personally now, as we bring this session to a close, is the children of Israel would have been in the wilderness for a number of years. And many assume that they would have had a calendar paper on the wall like we would have been born into. But it wasn't like that. The children of Israel they would have been using the principles of the luminaries, just as Exodus chapter 12 verse 1 says. Yah wanted his people to begin their months in a particular way, and he reminded them of that even before they exited Egypt. So just as we are in quote unquote Egypt right now, we are under the ways of another. Yah is calling us back to his original intention, and as we are being called back to our original intention, let us now pray that the Spirit of Yah gives us enlightenment, and as he enlightens us, we will continue to do his will and follow after his teachings.